Hi, welcome back to the basement. I'm Steve Lewis. This week we continue with more of my recent conversation with Jim Murphy. This episode will pick up pretty much directly from where we left off last time in episode 161. It was the late summer, early fall of 1961. The Beach Boys, newly formed or newly forming, were rehearsing their new song Surfin' with Height and Dorinda Morgan. Let's get right to it. Please enjoy more with Jim Murphy.
There's a lot of rehearsal going on. And I think that goes on pretty much September, October, and maybe half of November until Height and Dorinda Morgan are of the mind to take him actually into a studio and record it. The raw talent was there, but they didn't know anything about microphone placement. They didn't know anything about recording guitars. So they needed help with that. And the Morgans really helped shape them in a very simple, early way. They taught them a lot about how to record in the studio and how to get it on vinyl. And then Surfin' hits and it starts to go up the charts. And it's a great first song. And great enough to get them number 2 on the 2 major radio stations in Los Angeles and number 75 national. And it would have been higher nationally if Candix could have distributed it better. It gets rescued by Herb Newman and his Era record sales, and he distributes a copy of it eventually, which is what Herb Newman did all the time. When a local record hit, he would basically buy the rights to it and give it a bigger distribution. But the record stalls, I think, because there weren't enough copies of it in the record stores. But it's a big hit. They're doing really well. And already they're thinking about the follow-up hit. So sometime between late 61 and certainly by February 8th of 62, which is the next recording session, they write Surfin' Safari. Brian also has written Surfer Girl by that point. He's written Judy for his girlfriend at the time, Judy Bowles. And then Carl has written an instrumental, Karate, also known as Beach Boy Stomp. So they've got 4 new songs, and they record that February 8th. Well, what has happened before that is January 14th, Sunday, January 14th, Gary Usher knocks on Brian's door and says, hey, I'm visiting my uncle in the neighborhood. He says, you guys have got a band and there's, your record is on the charts called Surfin'. And I'm a singer-songwriter myself. And I have a record out too. And I've been writing songs and singing songs for a couple of years. Usher he's a couple of years older than Brian. He's got a lot of experience already at that time. And they just hit it off. Brian and Gary Usher just hit it off. That day, they write Lonely Sea. That same day, which remains in the can for a while. It's not on the first album. So January 14th, pivotal moment in the Beach Boy career, Brian meeting Gary Usher. February 8th, 1962, second recording session where those 4 songs are recorded. Then, they're still working on things and they're not happy with Candix because Candix had distribution problems. They want a better record company. But interestingly enough, on March 29th, 1962, when Murray Wilson sends this letter to Height and Dorinda Morgan, and he calls it his letter of intent and agreement. And I printed it in the appendix of my book. And in it, basically, he hands the Beach Boys over to the Morgans. We want you to take their career. We want you to produce their records. We're going to share in the profits with you. It's this letter that becomes the pivotal document in decades of lawsuits. March 29th, basically Murray hands the Beach Boys over to Height and Morgan. What's interesting is it's March 29th. So Surfin' has already dropped from the charts. They don't have a follow-up yet, and they don't have a record company. So they're in trouble. They're like, okay, what are we going to do next year? In the can, we have Surfin' Safari, Surfer Girl, Judy, and Karate. So you think they've got a potential follow-up right there. Right. Of course, those versions of Surfin' Safari and Surfer Girl, which go on to be big hits on Capitol, they're kind of simpler and a little bit different, and the production is not as good. So the next big event is Gary Usher says, well, hey, listen, I know Western Recorders, and the guy at Western Recorders is Chuck Britz. Why don't I introduce you to Chuck Britz? So in mid-April of 62, again, keep that letter in mind, March 29th, 62, Murray is content to hand the Beach Boys over to Height and Dorinda Morgan with huge financial implications, which they weren't aware of at the time, of course, but tremendous financial implications, big percentage of their profits. 2 weeks later, say by April 14th, the boys, I think with Audrey and Murray and Gary Usher, are at Western, and Brian meets Chuck Britz. Another pivotal moment in Brian's career. Chuck Britz becomes like a second set of ears to Brian and a really good friend. Much older guy, 34 years old. Brian, not even 20. He doesn't turn 20 until June. So they record a whole bunch of songs that Gary Usher had written. A song called Beginning of the End that Gary Usher wrote with Roger Christian. Another song called One Way Road to Love that Usher wrote by himself. song called Visions that Gary and Brian wrote, which later becomes #1 as the backside of The Revolution by Rachel and the Revolvers. Then another song called My Only Alibi by Gary Usher. So Usher's making some demos for his own career. And then on another session, probably just a day or two later, maybe April 15th or April 16th, They go in and they do the Beach Boys songs. They record a whole bunch of songs there. They do Surfin' Safari again. Brian and Gary have written 409 by that point. They do another version of Judy, and they do Lonely Sea. And they have this tape of these songs. So now we are mid-April. Murray starts to regret that March 29th letter. Murray realizes, wait a second, we don't need the Morgans. Okay, we can go into Western, work with Chuck Britz. My son and my boys are talented enough. We don't need the Morgans. We can do this on our own. And now he's having buyer remorse basically on that letter that he sent to the Morgans, but he doesn't know what to do about it. So mid-April through probably early May, just talking 3 weeks, maybe, mid-April to the first week in May, Murray's shopping that tape around. He goes to Decca, he goes to Dot, he goes to Columbia, I think. He's turned down by all these studios. But he finally gets an audience with Capitol Records. He brings in these tapes and he puts them on the A&R guy for Capitol that was really kind of country music. The name is escaping me right now, but he says, this isn't really my thing. I'm gonna put this on Nick Vinay's desk. Nick Vinay is our young rock and roll pop producer. And Vinay takes a while to call Murray back. They finally get a meeting. That happens in early May of '62. And Vinay says, yeah, we're going to sign you. Vinay says he heard 3 seconds of Surfin' Safari and knew that it was a hit. Maybe that's true. Maybe that's not. Most of what Nick Vinay ever said, you have to take with that grain of salt. So May 24th, 1962, they signed the contract with Capitol Records. And Capitol basically buys the demo of Surfin' Safari, 409, Judy, and Lonely Sea. And also on that same demo, Murray had them record, with Hype Morgan's help at Stereo Masters, the Beach Boys singing an a cappella version of Their Hearts Were Full of Spring that Murray wanted to tack on to that Western demo tape that he had to show Nick Vinay their vocal capabilities of singing a cappella, knowing that Capitol was the home of the Four Freshmen, the Four Preps, all these great vocal groups. And, he tacks on this a cappella of Their Hearts Were Full of Spring, which is just gorgeous. So Capitol now has that, and they decide to go with Surfin' Safari, backed at 409. That comes out June 4th. So very, very quick. Things are moving really fast. May 24th, they have a contract. They have a single out June 4th. Takes a while for Surfin' Safari and 409 to go up the charts. It really doesn't chart until probably sometime in July or August. But Capitol is putting all of its marketing muscle behind it. A great picture sleeve, which really helped sell 45s back in the day. And they're really, really pushing it. And then they're off and running. But now, now it becomes like, oh man, what do we do? Capitol says, well, we want an album. Back then the pressure on the recording artist was, okay, you have a hit single, you got to follow up with an album. The single's only 74 cents. The album's going to be $3.50 or whatever. We're going to make a lot more money with the album. Right. Well, they're not too deep in the songwriting material. It's always fascinated me that they had Surfer Girl, Lonely Sea, Judy, Karate, and they don't use those on the first album. Brian and Mike have written Surfin' Safari, obviously, that's the hit. Brian and Usher, and then later on, Mike gets a credit after the 1994 lawsuit as having contributed to 409 as well. That's the single that's going to drive the album. Surfing has been somewhat forgotten about on Candix. And then basically there's 3 different avenues of new songs. Brian and Mike sit down and write The Shift. And that's the only song that Brian and Mike really write for the new album. Brian's writing mostly with Gary Usher. So Brian writes with Gary Usher, 10 Little Indians, County Fair, Head You In, Tails I Lose, Cuckoo Clock, Chug-a-Lug, and 409. Chug-a-Lug and 409, Mike gets partial songwriting credit later on after the 94 lawsuit. And then they do some covers to flesh out the album. 3 covers, actually. A good 25% of that first album are covers. It's Little Miss America, Summertime Blues, and Moondog. And then the one outtake is Land Ahoy. I suspect Land Ahoy was going to be on the album, but at some point they decided to go with Surfin', much to Hype Morgan's delight, because by placing Surfin' on the album, he gets the royalty and the publishing for that. And Hype Morgan also owns the publishing for Surfin' Safari, Surfer Girl, Judy, Beach Boy Stomp, Karate, and Luau. So they don't use Luau on the album, but they do use Surfin'. Probably just because it had been a hit. It had been a single. It fits with the surfing theme of the album. And Morgan is just ecstatic. I have a copy of the document where Morgan basically gives Capitol the rights for like $1. Yeah, absolutely use it. I'm more than happy for you to use it because the royalty is going to mean a lot of money towards me. So that's how Surfin', I think, bumps Land Ahoy.
You think it was a choice between Surfin' and Land Ahoy somehow? I always wondered why they didn't bump one of the covers instead, like Moondog.
Moondog, I'm sure, came from Nick Vinay. The original Moondog by the Gamblers, by Derry Weaver, the guitar player that wrote Moondog. He was in a band called the Gamblers that Nick Vinay was part of. And Nick Vinay did the original dog howling on the Gamblers version of Moondog. So I'm pretty sure Nick Vinay probably said, "Hey, why don't you guys do that?" And in fact, who plays the guitar on the Beach Boy Moondog is the subject of a lot of speculation. Was Derry Weaver brought in? Because there was something about Derry Weaver being on the AFM musician sheets, but Nick Finet later saying, well, I put him on there just to kind of get double payment, and we collected money under his name, but he wasn't really there. Some of those AFM sheets, the dates and the names on the sheets are not set in stone. You got to look at them kind of very carefully.
Yeah.
So who's playing the guitar on Moondog on the Beach Boy album? Is like, is that Carl or David? Were they that good? Or is that Derry Weaver? I'm not sure what the answer is to this day, actually. So, but anyway, but I'm sure Vinay brings in Moondog. Little Girl, You're My Miss America was a popular song at the time, and it kind of fit Dennis's vocal style. So Dennis does a real charming version, I think, of that. Summertime Blues was a big hit by Eddie Cochran, and again fit the summer theme and the whole beach theme kind of thing. So yeah, how Lando Hoy gets bumped, I don't know. Maybe it was just considered the weakest song, you know.
Yeah.
And it's not a terrifically good song.
No,
you know?
no.
So they do the album in 3 sessions, 1 day in August and then 2 days in early September, and the album is finished. But Brian holds Surfer Girl back, which is really interesting. He's not happy with the Hype Morgan version of it, but he doesn't take it into the studio to work on it. He holds it back. And the same thing with the other songs that Morgan had recorded. And then the album is out October 1st. And then, you know, we talked about, I think, the last episode, the problem of coming up with a follow-up. You know, and 10 Little Indians is a bizarre follow-up.
Yeah.
You know, it does well. It does better than Surfing on the charts. I think it stalls at 49, which is not a bad hit, but it was just a bizarre follow-up to Surfing Safari.
Yeah.
And then they were in a bit of a quandary, and they come up with Surfing USA, which actually another one of your listeners questioned. I think Ranger Girl is her name on your show or her channel, but she was like, "How did that fiasco happen?" And that's a good question. Like, you know, the whole Surfing USA, Chuck Berry publishing thing, because the first label says Brian Wilson alone. And yet right next to that in the 3 o'clock position on the label, it says ARC Music Publishing, which is the
I
music
hadn't noticed that.
It's Chuck Berry's Music Publishing. It's just bizarre.
Yeah.
So I don't suspect Brian did it maliciously. You know, he's 20 years old. He loves Chuck Berry. He's listening to Sweet Little 16. He's dating Judy Bowles. Her brother Jimmy's a surfer. He comes up with all these surf spots. Mike contributes some lyrics too, of course. You know, neither Mike or Jimmy Bowles get any writing credit on Surfing USA originally. It's solely Brian Wilson, you know, which is probably not at all the case. The label credits are phoned in. What the Beach Boys did for Surfing Safari 409 is Hype Morgan and Murray had to call in their label credits to somebody at Capitol who would literally write them down and say, okay, this is what the label copy is going to be. The songwriter, the music publisher, the time, all that stuff, who produced, who arranged. So somebody phones that in. So I suspect somewhere along the line, maybe Nick Finet dropped the ball. He's handling the record for them. I don't think Brian maliciously stole the music from Chuck Berry. He probably thought, I'm just going to I'm influenced by that melody, and I'm going to write a song that became dangerously and legally too close to Sweet Little 16. So the interesting thing is, who could have told the folks at Capitol who make up the label copy, who wrote the song? It might have been Murray saying that. Well, my son Brian wrote it. Murray knows where the revenue streams come from. He's older. He's in his 40s. He's their father. He's a frustrated songwriter, and he's on the cusp of success and financial independence through his boys. And he knows the revenues in publishing and songwriting. So he was not above stretching the truth a little bit on who the music publisher was. Hype Morgan had to fight him eventually for the music publishing on Surfer Girl. I think initially the records say Sea of Tunes and Guild, and it wasn't. Sea of Tunes was not involved at all. It was all Guild, which is all Hype Morgan. And I think that kind of burned Murray a little bit, that Hype Morgan owned the music publishing to Surfer Girl, which is one of their biggest songs, of course. So anyway, so maybe it was Murray calling into Capitol, or maybe it was Nick Finet, or Murray telling Nick Finet that Surfing USA was written only by my son Brian, which is not true. And yet somehow the ARC Music Publishing appears on the label copy.
Yeah, that is very bizarre.
It's very bizarre.
Wow.
So it's like, okay, Capitol knew that the music publishing was Chuck Berry. Why wasn't it Chuck Berry / Brian Wilson, or Brian Wilson / Chuck Berry for the writing credit? But what appears on the label doesn't necessarily mean what happens in reality. In other words, just because your name is on the label doesn't mean that you're getting money. So initially, Chuck Berry wasn't getting any money, even though the ARC Music Publishing Company was on the label. He wasn't getting any money. And when his music company and his accountants realize of the accidental plagiarism, they get involved, and there's a settlement. Chuck Berry gets a lot of money from it, an undisclosed amount of money. I never was able to figure out how much money, but the Beach Boys didn't make any money from Surfin' USA.
Yeah.
Which was, I mean, maybe they made some, I can't say no money, but, not nearly as much as if they had written it solely themselves. But you can trace Surfin' USA. I think there's like 4 or 5 different label iterations. As everything gets changed with each new pressing, when they need new record labels, it's like, okay, well, who really wrote this song?
Yeah. What do we do with this?
Yeah.
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 Well, the
yeah.
ARC thing, it's like you can't have it both ways. That is really surprising.
Yeah, because you would think like, okay, they knew early on that Chuck Berry was, but I think they knew, but it never got followed through, whether because of Murray not submitting paperwork or Nick Vinay not following up. You'd think it would have been Vinay's responsibility, though, somebody at Capitol.
Right.
Yeah, and Chuck, most famously later on said he didn't mind it at all because it brought him a tremendous amount of revenue.
Right. Yeah. In the end, everybody profited tremendously from it, particularly him.
Yeah, but Surfin' USA is their saving song. They backed that with Shutdown, and they're off and running. The first Midwest tour happens in June of '63, is the tour of Hawaii. And then the second Midwest tour, July through August. And that's it. They never look back. But that year of '62, there is so much that happens in that year. And Brian, meeting these pivotal people, Gary Usher, Chuck Britz, signing with Capitol, keeping the music publishing, that's credited largely to Gary Usher. Usher tells a story of, hey, when they first met with Nick Vinay, Vinay was leaning on them to go with Capitol's own in-house music publisher because Vinay knew where the money was. And Usher was, no, you don't want to do that. And Usher tells the story of Murray just exploding at Gary Usher in the elevator on the way down from meeting with Nick Vinay. Like, why'd you bring up the music publishing? Why'd you say we have our own music publishing company? You could have spoiled the deal for us. And Gary was, calm down, Murray. You don't want to sign over the music publishing. That's where the money is, basically. We can form our own music publishing company. We can do this ourselves. That's the
Murray wasn't savvy to that.
Yeah, that's a good point, Steve, because, I didn't get to interview Gary Usher. He had already passed away, sadly. So I didn't get to ask him my own questions about that. So everything I used in my book about Gary Usher is a secondary source. But when you're writing a book like that, my experience was it pays you to take everything, not with a grain of salt, but you have to kind of look at everybody who says something. You have to kind of analyze it and say, does this ring true? Does this sound truthful? Or are they saying things now to better themselves or put themselves in a more important place, or say I was responsible for this, or if they weren't the Beach Boys, none of this would matter, but they become the Beach Boys, so all this does matter. So did Gary Usher really have that conversation with Murray Wilson in the elevator coming down from Nick Vinay's office? Did he really save the publishing? Well, like you pointed out, Murray is not a complete amateur. He's been writing songs for years by '62, probably since the early '50s, probably a good decade. I think his early songs are like 1952. So he's been writing songs for 10 years. But interestingly enough, he does not have his own music publishing company.
Yeah.
All of Murray's songs are published with other people, some with Guild, Height Morgan's company, some with Prestige, Height Morgan's company with ASCAP, and Mills Music, some other companies. So he does not have his own music publishing company. So that's a good question. Like, how savvy was Murray Wilson about music publishing? He should have been after 10 years, because when the sale of records comes in and you look at the revenue streams, the artist gets some, the songwriter gets some, and then the music publisher gets, the lion's share, plus forever. So you think Murray, after that decade of writing songs and his relationship with the Morgans, that he should have known. So unless you were a fly in that elevator, you're not quite sure. But Usher took credit, with his biographer of saying, no, I saved the Beach Boys from giving away millions of dollars in music publishing and forming Sea of Tunes. And here's the interesting thing: Sea of Tunes was not always called Sea of Tunes. Sea of Tunes was called Murray Wilson Music. And I came across proof of that.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, this is another thing. I'll show you during the memorabilia portion of it.
So we'll leave it there with that excellent teaser for next week when Jim will share some more of his amazing collectibles and memorabilia. Hope you enjoyed this. I look forward to your comments. Please hit like if you don't mind and subscribe if you haven't. Have a great week, and we will see you next time. Bye.